I'm here with Miss Sarah Ness, and we are going to talk about the benefits of community and cultivating community because it's not just about making your work more fun and having you be invested in it and enjoy it so it's more sustainable. It's also about finding work. And if you are facilitating, and especially if you want to make it your business, being able to find work is so important.
hmm and one of the things we'll go over is the difference between creating community and creating an audience. And why do these things? Like, what are the pros and cons of having the community? And also, how does that eventually maybe lead to a more fulfilling life on a wider scale?
So let's start with a story about pangolins. One of the biggest gigs I ever got as a facilitator came from a long ago client. And ironically, I wasn't even sure that this client liked me. Like, we'd been working together, and it was one of those clients where it's not clear. So sometimes I work with clients and I know they love me, or we realize it's not a good fit and we move on. But this client, I wasn't sure. And yet, I always knew that she did appreciate me as a person. And we kept in touch, and every so often we'd go out to lunch, and I always really enjoyed seeing her. And one day I got a text from her, or I texted her. I can't remember. It works both ways. And she said that she was getting really interested in conservation, and specifically pangolin conservation. And part of the way that I build community and why I love building community is that I love connecting people. So when I heard that, I said, oh, I happen to know the person that led the National Geographic documentary on pangolins. Why don't I introduce you? And she talked for years. I love the look on your
That's
face.
so cool. Like, I want an introduction.
We talked for years about me working with her and her company, but I think it was ultimately like this act of generosity and community that had her finally bring me in to work with them, which was not my intention at all, which is often the way it goes with community, that when you're just being community minded, it ends up leading to opportunities. But if you start thinking about community as a way to generate opportunities, it can backfire. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And one of the things I love about that is there are things I think that give us energy as leaders and things that take energy away. And I know a lot of community leaders seem to do it for a lot of different reasons. So some people create community because they want an audience, they need to sell their products. And that can be an issue if you're not giving value to people that's consummate to what you're asking them to put in. Um, so always like giving more than you're receiving in a way is really helpful. And one of the ways to create that is to find out what it is that you really love giving. So for Megan, like, I think connecting people is not necessarily a stretch for you. It's actually something you like doing. It gives you energy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for me, I really like creating distinctions in things. Like, I like breaking them down. I like teaching them. I like explaining. I like systems. So right now, like, I don't even see myself as a community leader, even though a lot of people do, because I don't really do the day-to-day maintenance anymore. But I will be the one that, like, when something comes up in my community, I'll go like, oh, there's a need for this. Like, actually, a way I got work recently with Google after years of being in communication with a fellow community leader and friend, um, with my friend over at a company called Evolution that does wonderful business consulting. The leader, or one of their consultants, is also the leader of the Santa Barbara Authentic Relating community. So we'd kind of like bumped into each other over years. We kept having this conversation of we should do something together, and there just was never a thing. And then when the coronavirus crisis came up, I was like, how do I serve my community? And I led a bunch of online events for different groups and for my friends. And then the other thing I'm really driven by is learning. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, I generally know how to do online events. I'm not being fed by them anymore. I'm not fed by creating community online. I don't want to do Zoom calls. I don't want to moderate Facebook groups, even if it would like get me audience. And I ended up taking the information I learned and putting it into like a 30-page manual on how to do Zoom events online. And I was like, this is my gift to community, is a resource that will let other leaders like do their thing better. And my friend Simon at Evolution, based on that, contacted me and said, hey, I'm doing a training for Google on how to do online events. Do you want to come on? Um, so I think finding like what's the thing that you naturally love doing and giving, and representing that to your community can really be the thing that brings it forward.
There's no one right way to do community, and you really do have to find what works for you in order to not burn out and to stay sourced. Because when you're lit up about what you're offering the world, one, you can do it all day long, and two, people get value from it because they can feel your investment and your passion in it.
hmm I want to talk a little bit about building a community versus a group of friends versus an audience, versus a movement, kind of. Uh, so, a community, there's a lot of different definitions of community. One of my favorites is that community is a group of people that are committed to each other's well being. And that can also describe a group of friends. Something that happens a lot for me when people are first creating community is they have this question of like, how do I get it out to the public? How should I promote it? How many people should be part of it? And a lot of the time, what I tell them is figure out, are you offering something to people? Like, are you offering a service? Are you trying to build an audience? Or are you just trying to get a bunch of people to relate with each other? Because if you're trying to build a community that are people that you'll be friends with, you probably want to source from the people you're already friends with, the people you want to be friends with, the people you know you like, and just invite them like in really small groups because community forms from little seeds. Community forms from what's called often small world networks, which means people connect with the people around them. If you put something out on the internet or out on Meetup, you're going to get a smattering of people, and they're going to be people that respond to Meetup events, which is a specific personality often. If you invite your friends and ask them to invite their friends, then what you get is this kind of organic, slowly growing community. If what you want is more of an audience, you might choose to put things on a wider format. But then it can be sometimes really hard to figure out like, well, should I keep in touch with these people? Should I put them in touch with each other? And for community, people need to have intersections with each other. For an audience, they usually have most of their intersection with the person that's leading, and they'll mostly be responding to you. So if you want to lead a community, you really have to try to create more connection, like cross like sectionally, basically. Ways you can do that, you can host social events like potlucks that just have people hanging out with each other. I like leaving social time after events for people to connect and encouraging them, like get each other's numbers or, ask consent to get each other's numbers. You can create Facebook groups or ways for people to communicate with each other. I've even had like spreadsheets come up where people can like post their name and their phone number and when they're available and connect with each other. So creating those intersections are really good. And I'll talk on movements in a second, but you want to say anything on that?
I love the distinction between community and audience because some people don't realize that what they actually want to build is an audience or a community.
Mhm.
So it's helpful to know. And as a best practice, if you are building an audience, you might still choose to find ways or hire people to build community within your audience. It just depends on what sort of leader you want to be and what sort of business model you want to have.
And if you're trying to build an audience, community can even be a detriment because you can't control it. Like it's really hard to have quality control over a community. You can kick some members out, but then everybody gets afraid of when are they going to get kicked out of the community. So having like knowing what you're okay with and not okay with, setting that from the beginning, having conversations with people about it. You have to be a more responsive and transparent and authentic leader if you're going to go towards the community route. Um, if you're trying to build a movement, it's even more so like including people and including people's voices, but really having that core intention clear. Movements are best when you know exactly what you're trying to put forward and what that means to you. And either it can be a grassroots movement where people are inspired enough by the idea that they kind of carry it forward, or it can be like a top down movement where you have a leader that is representing an ideal and they're the one that's bringing it into the world. Authentic relating has very much been a grassroots movement where there's been a couple figureheads, but it's really not figurehead based. And it's been more people taking the practices and using them. But what's encouraged that is that the leaders, including me, have kept it very open source. The games manual is donation based, it's compiled from communities all over the world. People can add to it, they can take the games and lead them anywhere. And one of the things that's kept it that open source is we don't even have certification for it. So that leads to a lack of quality control, which can be difficult, but it also means that people can spread things really quickly. So, there's then even a consideration of like, is the work you're proposing safe enough that you're okay with people taking it and running with it, and saying that explicitly in your events.
What that makes me think of is the why behind the work that we do. Because if you look at why you're doing the work that you do, you'll probably figure out whether you want to be building a community or an audience or a movement,
Hmm.
and letting that really dictate what you do. I'm curious, Sarah, if someone said to you, you need to build one of those three things right now, which one would you build and why?
A community, an audience, or a movement.
Hmm.
I got to be totally honest, I would make a group of friends,
Mm,
like that kind of community.
yeah.
I feel like I've been creating a movement through creating documents and work and everything. And I love doing that. It stimulates me intellectually, but I'm feeling like kind of emotionally starved right now because I have close friendships, but my community used to actually, this is a good story. The place where my community used to come from is not people that attended authentic relating events, which is the group that I built, but they had community with each other. Because once I got enough facility with those games, I didn't necessarily get a lot of joy from playing them over and over and over again with new people. And so the place I found community was I would train anyone that wanted to come along as facilitators. And over time, I'd even invite my close friends into the facilitation community to train. And I would host social events, and we would have like an event every other week. We would get together, and people would just like test new games and lead them and get
I love
feedback.
that.
Yeah, we would like
Mhm.
do our work together. We'd have Hanukkah parties and Christmas parties and New Year's ones, and there were a couple people that really decided to be leaders of that community for social reasons as well as for practical ones. And that became a community because we all had a focus. Like we were serving, we had a reason to be together. Community kind of works best when it does have an orienting principle or service or thing that you're gathered around. um, and then I made this choice that I wanted to turn the community over basically to the community. I was leaving town for 6 months and maybe longer, and so I invited the community to like take it over, and some people brought forth a proposal to become a nonprofit. And what actually happened was they got so focused on becoming a nonprofit that they didn't see the use of fostering the facilitation community because they didn't have the same need for that kind of friendship that I did. And the group could keep running at that point without the facilitation community. Like there were enough people that just wanted to lead to get practice. And so when I came back, like I didn't have that same group of friends readily available. Um, and I haven't really found a great way to create it since. And I think I need a group with a new orienting principle. And one of the beautiful things that's actually happened is people have started taking authentic relating principles and bringing it back to their own communities or finding people within that network that they want to connect with and then going off and making their own thing. And one of the downsides of being a community leader is I really need other leaders to be the people that I connect with. I need other people that are also going to like be the ones to create stuff, or when someone needs to do the dishes, they're going to also volunteer because otherwise I end up doing everything. Like if it's not getting done, I'll do it. So it has become harder to find community as a community leader, but also like connecting with you. Like you'd be a person I'd want in my community, and Joff, who's behind the camera, and there's a number of others. And now I'm trying to find a way of bringing that rare group together from like all over the US and the world, and finding some way of making us a group and thinking about what our purpose should be. And that might blossom into an entirely new product or community or movement or whatever. I don't know.
I love what you bring up because I've had the same experience, and I think it's a lot of times not spoken about among community builders or facilitators. Is that the more visible you become, the more lonely you can get,
Mhm.
and the more burnt out you can get. And it's ironic because the better at your work you also become. So I think that maybe we started with this idea of how to build community, but I think that it's really there's this nuanced piece around how to keep a sacred community around you that's just like where you get sourced, and how to do that in a way that feeds you. And I feel like every facilitator, especially as you get become more and more in demand, needs that.
Mhm. And I think that kind of brings us back, go back to the distinction between audience and community, because if you already have a really wonderful community around you, you may not want to build another one for the work you're doing, and that means you need to get sourced in other ways. And maybe you don't get sourced by like helping people connect with each other, and then you need so basically like you need energy put back in if you're going to lead something. And for some people that's by getting contracts and being able to make a living. For other people, it's making friends. For others, it's learning things. So yeah, knowing what sources you, knowing what you need, and kind of treating it as this ever evolving experiment where community can mean what it does to you. So with this little fireside chat, we've only like barely scratched the surface of community building. And we're going to create a longer course on that where we go into a roadmap for creating community and more of these distinctions and what happens when you create community, how people can kind of have a mom complex with it. What do you do about that? There's so many different pieces to this. So stay tuned for a future course on that.